Number 3, Tess White.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will review public sector guidance on single-sex spaces in light of reported concerns about the Care Inspectorate and the Scottish Prison Service.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville.
In April 2022, the Equality and Human Rights Commission published some revisions to their guidance entitled Separate and Single-Sex Service Providers, a Guide on the Equality Act, Sex and Gender Reassignment Provisions. In this guide, the Commission clearly states that as regulator for the Equality Act 2010, they provide guidance on the law to help organisations comply with their legal obligations. The Commission has recently completed a consultation on their statutory codes of practice that sets out the steps that should be taken to ensure people are not discriminated against. The codes of practice explain how the Equality Act 2010 works in relation to provision of services, public functions and associations, providing practical examples to illustrate how the law can be used to protect equality. The updated codes of practice have yet to be published. The Scottish Government expects all relevant organisations to comply with the requirements of the 2010 Act and other legislation in their role as employers.
Tess White.
Cabinet Secretary, you may be interested to know that the Care Inspectorate guidance for children and young people's services on the inclusion of trans and non-binary young people makes the following statement, and I quote, "The provision of gendered facilities such as toilets is social convention. There is no law in Scotland about this." Does the Scottish Government agree with the Care Inspectorate's statement?
Cabinet Secretary.
The provision of the Equality Act 2010, including those relating to single-sex spaces and the general exception in relation to communal residential accommodation, apply to Scotland. Any issues of how these are operating in particular situations are matters for the EHRC as the enforcement body for the Act and for the relevant public body concerned.
Tess White.
No. It's a ludicrous and frankly chilling statement from a regulator that's supposed to protect Scotland's most vulnerable children and young people. There are massive safeguarding issues arising from this reckless guidance. But it's not just the Care Inspectorate. The Scottish Prison Service is in the spotlight once again because it's allowing trans-identifying prison officers to perform intimate and utterly unacceptable rub-down searches of vulnerable women visiting the prison estate. Violent trans-identifying men can still be housed in the female prison estate in certain circumstances. So will this Scottish Government finally do the decent thing, lay down the law on Scotland's public bodies and tell them to withdraw this ill-informed and insidious guidance which allows the rights of male-bodied individuals to transcend those of women and girls?
Cabinet Secretary.
With regards to the Care Inspectorate part of the member's question, everyone in Scotland deserves to receive safe and high-quality care that meets their needs and respects their rights and choices. And it is very important that the rights of and the rights to all of those involved are considered and respected in everything that is done. With relation to the Scottish Prison Service, the member will also be aware that new rules were introduced in 2023, which provides for visitors. The law states that visitors are searched in accordance with Rule 106 of those rules. Consent is required. At Rule 106(3), it is made clear that general searching of the person or their clothing is to be done by an officer of the same gender as the visitor, and it must be completed as quickly and as decently as possible, and the use of force is not permitted. And I would also stress at 106(4) that a visitor who is being searched cannot be required to remove, and a search must not involve the removal of any clothing other than an outer coat, jacket, headgear, gloves or footwear.
Ash Regan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, another week, another egregious breach of women and girls' human rights, this time impacting on vulnerable children in care and women on the prison estate, many of whom will have trauma backgrounds. Does the government not understand that by promoting this illegal and illiterate gender self-ID policies that override and nullify sex-based safeguarding through handing out access all area passes, that this is completely unacceptable? When is the government going to wake up to their obligations to ensure that public bodies follow the law ensure safeguarding and women's human rights are upheld before the next scandal unfolds, probably next week?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as I've made clear on many occasions now, the Scottish Government strongly supports the separate and single-sex exemptions in the 2010 Equality Act, which can allow for people to be excluded when this is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. I also mentioned in my original answer the very important guidance that is published by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and indeed their work on the statutory codes of practice, including that work to update that. And I look forward to the Commission continuing that work and for that updated code of practice to be published.
Thank you. That concludes topical questions.